Legend Total War here, and today I'll be explaining and analyzing the Wood Elf update. So I've got access to a early access build for the Wood Elf update, so special thanks to Creative Assembly for that. And I'll also be in the chat because this is going to be a premiere, and right after this video there'll be a live stream where we'll be starting a new Orion campaign with the Wood Elf update. Now there's not going to be any DLC content covered in this video or the live stream, so we're just primarily focusing on the Wood Elf update. So the crux of this update here, it is a really big overhaul, but this is essentially chapter 2 of the Wood Elf story. Chapter 1 being the Amber accumulation. That's more or less over. Amber's still in the game, but it's really not that big of a deal anymore. You only accumulate Amber whenever you finish a Ritual of Rebirth, and you spend that Amber in the tech tree over here. It's fairly late in the campaign that you do that stuff. Your buildings and units are no longer locked behind Amber, and I think a lot of you guys will be pretty thankful for that, because it was a very highly criticized mechanic. I feel like it was fine in Warhammer 1, but in Warhammer 2 it really sort of kept the Wood Elves behind. Anyway, now it's all about revitalizing the magical forests. There are 8 magical forests throughout Mortal Empires, and Athelloren is the biggest one, and the one that you want to primarily focus on in getting it rebirthed, I suppose. And that is about accumulating forest health, and the more health you accumulate, there's various milestones in which you'll get various benefits. And as long as you hold onto the primary magical forest region, this being the Oak of Ages, you'll get that. So for example, if we revitalized it and then lost the Oak of Ages, I'm pretty sure you lose the bonus, but as soon as you take it back, you get it. Anyway, surrounding all of the magical forests are heathlands. These are just any region that actually borders the magical forest, and these are the regions that affect the actual health of the forest. So let's just take Paravon as an example here. These guys are neutral. This symbol here basically means that they are neither positively nor negatively affecting the forest health. If I was to declare war on them, this would turn into this symbol down here, meaning that they're basically causing harm to the magical forest. Okay? If I was to get a military alliance with them, they would start positively affecting the magical health of the forest. So by getting alliances around here, you can, without having to conquer it, start boosting the health of these forests. Now, another thing that I could do is just come down over here and blow up that settlement. If I raise it to the ground, it will provide health to the magical forest. But any raised settlement can be reoccupied, and if it's reoccupied by an enemy, it will start causing problems again. So you just accumulate that stuff over time. There's other ways to go about getting extra health for the forest, but I'm not going to go into too much detail with that. But just briefly, there's this building here. Building that up to tier 4 will get you 1 extra health to local magical forest. So if you build that 4 times, that's extra 4. For example, if I was to go to the Gaian Vale, which is now a magical forest, but by the way, Lothern is not. I'm not sure if we occupy Lothern, we can build it up like we did before. I haven't done that yet. But Gaian Vale, you can occupy as if it was a tree. And if you get this revitalized, get it done the Ritual of Rebirth, it'll start generating more health to Athelloren. And in addition to other bonuses, each magical forest has its own global bonus that it provides, ranging from being okay to being a bit meh. Some of them aren't really that valuable. It's up to you if you want to get them all, I suppose. You totally don't have to. The main one to focus on is the Oak of Ages. Now, aside from the actual mechanical changes that the Wood Elves are going through, there's also like a big update in terms of how their structures work, their skill trees, and just how the economy of the Wood Elves function and where their strength rating places amongst the other races. So, more now than ever will the difficulty rating that you play on make such a big difference to, you know, how easy or difficult the campaign's going to be. If you play on the lower difficulties, that being on easy, normal, or hard, you're probably not going to have any trouble with your Wood Elf campaign. But on very hard and legendary, there is such a pronounced difference in the difficulty of it. You are going to find that the Wood Elves are basically going to be crippled based on the new updates and all the different changes. So I will go through them, but I will just say straight away that this update is not a buff for the Wood Elves. They've got some cool mechanics, by all means. It's probably more lore friendly. They might actually be more fun, but are they stronger? No. Are they weaker? Absolutely, they are weaker. Anything that they had before that was cheesy has pretty much been nerfed into oblivion or removed entirely, and they have not really been given many tools left to compensate for that, especially if you don't get the DLC. So, let's go through some of that. Now, first thing I want to address is the outposts. Outposts basically no longer make any money. They used to make 50 gold per outpost. Don't make any cash anymore. You can still make a little bit of cash from only building the resource building, but it's only 50 gold, and then you get a small amount of those tradable resources. So if you've got a trade agreement, that'll help give your income up a little bit. You are heavily disincentivized from going out into the open world and making as many outposts as possible, because if you go out and the bigger you get, you will encounter more people, you'll get a great power penalty, they'll hate you, you will not be able to defend your borders very well. In one of my campaigns, I decided to go and expand, and the bigger I got, the harder I found it. So what I ended up doing was abandoning a lot of those territories just because I just didn't want to deal with those other factions, because I just wasn't making any money from my outposts. No longer does these outposts provide global bonuses to your weapon strength and your income, with the exception of racial capitals such as Skaven Blight. Only Skaven Blight will still provide a plus 10% bonus, but you'll no longer get that plus 2% bonus building that used to be in outposts. That's no longer there anymore. Ports used to make about 500 gold per turn, assuming that you had researched Mathland Lord of the Deeps. However, this technology has been nerfed pretty significantly. It now only increases the income from ports by plus 100, where previously it was plus 400%. So you're looking at maybe 200 extra gold for every port. That's a pretty significant nerf. Gold used to be worth a lot more. It's now only worth 100 income per turn. So pretty much across the board, in terms of outposts are just way less valuable. However, the actual tree settlements, they are kind of more valuable in a way. But it's only in terms of base income. If we have a look at things, you will also notice that there's actually fewer build slots. They've really consolidated the number of buildings. There used to be a lot more buildings than this. So a lot of the buildings, so as an example, there used to be 2 garrison types of buildings, and that's just been both put into one building now. So they've sort of consolidated a lot of their buildings. So they don't need the 12 build slots, making it, I guess, easier to develop your tree settlements. But anyway, they do make a much higher base income in terms of like the Great Hall, and these buildings here make more money now than they used to. Like these 2 here, they didn't used to make any money. That made 1,000 gold, but it used to be at tier 3 that it made 1,000 gold. So overall, if this was comparing it at tier 5 versus the previous patch versus now, previous patch it would have made about 1,120 without any modifiers. Now it's at 2,500. However, we don't have the extra tax building in here anymore. That's been removed, so that's an extra 20% tax rate. We don't have the extra income from grapes for adjacency regions, which is really going to nerf Athel Lauren, because that was a big way in increasing their income, because each of these could essentially increase each other's income by 80%. So overall, I would say that the tree settlements probably will make about the same amount of money as they did in the current patch as they will in the future patch. This is of course subject to change. But the big difference is, without those extra modifiers from outposts, they're actually going to end up making less money, even though the higher base income is there. There's just less to augment it. There's less in the tech tree here that to boost it. I'm not going to go over each individual thing. We'll do all that during the live stream. But I would say overall, a lot of these technologies, at least in terms of economy, is a significant nerf. It's really going to be more pronounced on the upper difficulties because of supply lines. Now, when dealing with low economy races, now there's nothing wrong with being a low economy race, which the Wood Elves have always been, but now they're even lower. Supply lines affect low economy races even more. This is why if you're playing on easy, normal, or hard, a supply line penalty of 1, 2, or 7% respectively is not that big of a deal. But when you're dealing with the 15% from on very hard difficulty and 15% on legendary, plus the 10% extra on legendary, because you take an immediate 10% as soon as you start the campaign, those low economy buildings are going to really affect you in terms of how many armies you can field. You are going to have fewer armies now than you did before. Now, that's kind of okay because you can teleport between the different tree regions, thanks to the world, what's it, the deep roots. But you got to keep in mind that you can only do it once every 10 turns, so it's not active at the moment. It'll be available on turn 10. Once I've done it once, I have to wait 10 turns before I can say come back. So it's not something that you can just abuse unlimited. You can reduce the time on the deep roots a little bit, but you still have to be very careful. There's nothing extra that they have to defend their settlements, still that don't get walls. Their garrisons aren't really made any stronger. Like you lose the extra weapon strength things, which used to affect the garrisons as well. So overall, I would say that the armies of the Wood Elves are a little bit weaker than they used to be. Their economy is a little bit weaker, but they're more fun now than they used to be, because you don't have to go out and conquer the whole world. You don't have to interact with the rest of the world. And from what I've seen, the rest of the world, more or less, doesn't interact with you all that much. So it is, for a very large portion of it, a very isolated campaign. It's very separate from the rest of the stuff that's going on in Mortal Empires. My only concern is that in the late campaign, when Archaon is defeated and there are a bunch of big factions, are they then going to turn their eye towards Athel Loren and be like, wow, you're really weak, I'm going to go punch you? If that is the case, you have far less tools at your disposal now to deal with that kind of threat than you did before. So it is probably highly recommended that you finish your campaigns before like turn 140, or else you'll find the Order Tide or whatever tide is going to come at you, and it's going to be much more difficult to defend, especially if you own multiple of the magical forests. The more forests that you have, the harder it's going to be to defend it, because especially with that supply line problem, no one tree settlement is going to be able to sustain one of your armies. Unless you want to have like a couple of really small armies. The Wood Elves have definitely taken a nerf with this patch. Okay, so this last part of this video is where I want to address the overall sweeping changes that are going to make to like all factions, but they're definitely going to be affecting the Wood Elves quite severely. Coming with this patch is going to be a bit of an update to the cost of lords and heroes. It's going up significantly. So lords, you can be expecting to pay easily over 500 for each of your lords. If they're very powerful legendary lords, you could see them into the thousands in your late campaigns, and heroes are going to start getting excessively expensive as well. So I think what CA want to do here is try to mitigate the amount that people use hero spamming, because heroes are very powerful in this game for sure. Also, a lot of the traits with the Wood Elves, such as Talons of Kurnos, that no longer affects the entire army, at least with the heroes. The Lord trait, Talon of Kurnos, still does. So gone are the days where your Way Watchers are going to have 300 range. That's just not going to happen anymore. So all of these little meta changes, these little meta nerfs, will have really led to a pretty significant weakening of the Wood Elves, especially, again, really iterating, this is really going to hurt the very hard and legendary players, and especially going to hurt people who like to cheese. So yes, I'm definitely going to be affected by this, and I've definitely found that the Wood Elf campaign is a lot more difficult than it was before. Now that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, it's just forcing me to come up with new creative ways to get around it, find new cheeses, I suppose, to get around the restrictions, but there are definitely more restrictions now than there were before. Another thing that's come into play here is public order. Public order is kind of getting overhauled a bit, and this is again going to go across the board to all factions. Revolt farming is not something you're going to see too often anymore. So on legendary difficulty, when you've got a -8 public order difficulty penalty, right, you can pretty much expect within the first few turns you're going to have a revolt. Well, at least that was previously. But what happens now is that the closer you get to -100, the game gives you a mitigating factor towards whatever you're going towards. So if you're heading towards -100, it'll start giving you a bit more public order. Not to stop you from reaching 100, but to slow you down from getting it. So you're not going to be able to have a revolt and then the very next turn just have another revolt sort of thing. That's gonna be gone. Same thing as if you're moving towards +100. The closer you get to +100, the game will try to slow you down by giving negative penalties to keep you from doing that. It'll want you to gravitate towards the center, towards 0. So yeah, at -75 public order, you'll start getting a +8 public order bonus. So that's not enough to mitigate this, so eventually you would end up having a revolt. Now, another thing as well is that the more negative public order you've got, it'll start affecting things like growth, increasing construction costs, all of that. So again, this is something that's really going to affect legendary difficulty players because you have such a pronounced public order problem. So overall, in summary, I guess, of the patch, I definitely like the mechanics that are coming through here. I think they're going to be enjoyable. Do I think that the Wood Elves are competitive with the other races? No. This has set them back big time. They are about the equivalent as Beastmen in terms of weak. They are a wet noodle now. They were way stronger before than they are going into this, especially if you're playing on the upper difficulties. If you're playing on the lower difficulties, it's probably fine, because you don't have those public order problems, you don't have those upkeep problems, you don't have to worry about the supply lines being excessive. But when you're playing on those upper difficulties, you're really going to have to penny pinch now. So those of you who wanted an easy legendary difficulty campaign, this is not for you. But, you know, maybe it is. The challenge is definitely going to be there, and it's definitely a culture shock. This is probably the first time I've seen a overhaul of a faction that's actually been like a massive nerf. Every other faction update in this game has been a buff. The Dwarfs got a buff, Vampire's got a buff, Empire got a buff, Greenskin's got a massive buff. Wood Elves are getting a nerf. They've got fewer tools to work with, yeah, and it's gonna be tougher for them. It's cool, don't get me wrong. There's cool mechanics, and they'll be able to do things that other factions can't do. But they're weaker overall, and I think late campaign, other factions are gonna bully them a bit. But I've got to play a little bit more to find that out. And so at this point, we'll say, let's stop this video. Hope you guys get a rough idea of it. Hope you've enjoyed it, and let's get started with the live stream. If that's what we want to see, click in the link below, and I'll see you soon.